My name is Harold Weidra. I teach in the politics department here, and I'm very happy that the Department of Police hosts this event. I must apologize for my voice, a bit under the weather, like probably quite a few of you. I'm very happy to see so many people for this talk by His Excellency Bishop Athanasius Schneider, who has come the long way from Astana in Kazakhstan. This is a talk that is co-organized by the Center for Philosophy, Religion and Politics, and I'm very happy to say that very grateful to Professor Tom DeAndre, who made this whole event possible by bringing Bishop Schneider here. If you permit me, I will introduce our speaker very, very, very briefly, both him biographically and also the topic that we are having today, political authority and the duties of conscience. So, Bishop Schneider is somehow my compatriot, as a Russlanddeutscher, somebody whose parents were abducted after World War II and brought to Russia, to the Soviet Union, where he was born. He was born in Tokmak in Kyrgyzstan, and had quite a moved upbringing, because he went to Estonia when he was 8 years old, and then in 1973 his parents could leave the country when he was 12 years old and went to the southwest of Germany, Baden-Württemberg, where he would be brought up as a German, but he still insists that he's a Russian German, a kind of Schwarzmeerdeutscher, right? Sort of like a Russian German from the Black Sea. And he did study philosophy and theology in Brazil, right? This is why he also speaks Portuguese next to another 7 or 8 languages. He was ordained a priest in 1990 and wrote later on a dissertation on the Shepherd of Hermas, the Hirte von Hermas, which I knew nothing about. It's about visions, Christian doctrine of morality in a text that is mainly about angels, isn't it? So, to be continued, and a certainly fascinating topic. In 2006, he was ordained Bishop of Karaganda, and since 2011, he's been the auxiliary bishop, Weihbishop in Astana, in Kazakhstan. So these are just very, very, basic signposts, but I think you can already gauge from this, biography that the topic we are hearing about today is somehow related to this biography. It is about the question to what extent, and this is also why it is taking place in the politics department, about the question regarding obedience, compliance with a legitimate government, up to what point that can go, and up to, or from which point on, and under what circumstances, and with what kind of motivations people have started. I don't particularly like the word resistance. I would rather say has started having the courage and showing the courage to make clear to the political authorities that you can go up to here and not any further. Now, we tend to have views of the past. I mean, probably many of you have heard about Antigone, about Thomas More, about Sophie Scholl, about Helmut James Graf von Moltke, about Alexander Solzhenitsyn, about Václav Havel, and many others who, in one way or the other, have had a push on inspiration from their conscience. And the names I've just said mean that it's not necessarily religious or transcendent, but certainly religious inspiration, or let's say grace, has been fundamental for many of these names that I've just outlined. And as we just had a brief talk with Bishop Schneider earlier on, this doesn't stop So it's not that these historic examples exist and therefore we should be fine. This was the past and now we live in perfect times, and therefore there is no need for duties of conscience, so to speak, in the face of political authority. So, and there are plenty of recent examples. I think I don't want to preempt any of what His Excellency is going to touch upon, but I just wanted to say, perhaps with one last point that I got from the foreword of Cardinal Ratzinger's Introduction to Christianity, which is from the year 2000, where he says that we already have forgotten what the Gulag Archipelago, by Solzhenitsyn was about. In the year 2000, this has receded into the prehistoric past. We don't talk about that anymore. And that struck me, because that was something that, in the 1980s, this is part of my own research, was, absolutely a massive achievement that actually showed how the Soviet Union was a regime that did not respect the basic human rights and other things. So I think we need to be reminded that the duties of conscience in the face of political authority are always on and always need to be taken into account, and I'm pretty sure we're going to have an enlightenment given by you, Bishop Schneider. Thank you very much. And just to say, after that, of course, there will be the possibility to have a discussion.
Dear Professor Vidra, thank you very much for your invitation, for your greetings, and also I greet and thank Professor Thomas D'Andrea for his invitation. I am happy to see here also His Excellency Bishop Hopes and Monsignor Harkness. All of you I greet. I will speak about political authority and the duties of conscience. The source of human authority is in God. These truths proclaims Holy Scripture, both in the Old and New Testament. To the Roman governor ostentatiously pretending that he had the power of releasing and condemning, Jesus Christ answered, "Thou shouldst not have any power against me unless it were given thee from above." St. Paul wrote to the Romans saying, "There is not power but from God, from which, as from its cause, he draws his conclusion, the prince is the minister of God." And St. Augustine said, "We do not attribute the power of giving government and empires to any but to the true God." Nature, or rather God, who is the author of nature, wills that man should live in a civil society. And this is clearly shown both by the faculty of language, the greatest medium of intercourse, and by numerous innate desires of the mind, and the many necessary things and things of great importance which men isolated cannot procure, but which they can procure when joined and associated with others. But now a society can neither exist nor be conceived in which there is no one to govern the wills of individuals in such a way as to make, as it were, one will of many, and to impel them rightly and orderly to the common good. Therefore God has willed that in a civil society there should be some of the rule, political authority. But no man has in himself or of himself the power of constraining the free will of others by fetters of authority of this kind. This power resides only in God, the creator and legislator of all things, and it is necessary that those who exercise political authority should do it as having received it from God. One of the main tasks of political authority consists in making, promulgating, and enforcing law. According to St. Thomas Aquinas, law is a certain rule and measure of acts whereby man is induced to act or is restrained from acting. The norm of measure of human actions is reason. Therefore, law has an essential relation to reason. In the first place, to divine reason. In the second place, to human reason. When it acts correctly, it means in accordance with the purpose or the final cause implanted in it by God. Law is directed by its nature to the good, and especially to the universal or common good. St. Augustine said that which is not just seems to be no law at all. And St. Thomas Aquinas concludes, saying, wherefore the force of a law depends on the extent of its justice. In human affairs, a thing is said to be just from being right, according to the rule of reason. But the first rule of reason is the law of nature. Consequently, every human law has just so much of the nature of law as it is derived from the law of nature. But if in any point it deflects from the law of nature, it is no longer a law, but a perversion of law. So St. Thomas Aquinas. One can ask whether human law binds a man in conscience. St. Thomas Aquinas answers that laws framed by man are either just or unjust. If they be just, they have the power of binding in conscience from the eternal law whence they are derived. Laws are said to be just both from the end, when to wit they are ordained to the common good, and from their form, when burdens are laid on the subjects according to an equality of proportion and with a view to the common good. For since one man is a part of the community, each man in all that he is and has belongs to the community, just as a part in all that it is belongs to the whole. Wherefore nature inflicts a loss on the part in order to save the whole, so that on this account such laws as these, which impose proportionate burdens, are just and binding in conscience and are legal laws. On the other hand, laws may be unjust in two ways. First, by being contrary to human good, through being opposed to the things mentioned above, either in respect of the end, as when an authority imposes on his subject burdensome laws, conductive not to the common good, but rather to his own cupidity or vainglory, or in respect of the author, as when a man makes a law that goes beyond the power committed to him, or in respect of the form, as when burdens are imposed unequally on the community, although with a view to the common good. The like are acts of violence rather than laws. Therefore, such laws do not bind in conscience, except perhaps in order to avoid scandal or disturbance, for which cause a man should even yield his right. According to Matthew 5:40, if a man take away thy coat, let go their cloak also unto him. So, if these are opposed to divine good, such are the laws of tyrants when they are opposed to divine good, inducing, for example, to idolatry or to anything else contrary to divine law. And laws of this kind must nowise be observed, because, as stated in the Acts of the Apostles, we ought to obey God rather than man. Sir Thomas Aquinas. If a law in any point deflects from the natural law, it is, as we already mentioned, a perversion. That it is convenient first to clarify, therefore, the meaning. What is natural law? The eternal law of God impresses itself on rational creatures and endows them with an inclination toward their proper actions and ends. This participation of the rational creature in the eternal law of God, this is called natural law. The light of natural reason, by which we distinguish between good and evil, is the reflection of the divine light in us. All law, insofar as it participates in right reason, is derived therefore from the eternal law. And St. Thomas Aquinas says, every human law has just so much of the nature of a law as it is derived from the law of nature, natural law. So, if the recourse to the transcendental, eternal law of the Creator is not taken, we have a choice between the alternatives, either having no ontological foundation at all for the contents of the legal order and accepting as valid every positive order that can compel submission, or erecting the intramundane elements such as instincts, desires, secular reason, the will to power, the survival of the fittest, etc., to erecting them into absolutes. If we do not resort to the transcendental eternal law, we have a choice between these alternatives. And so, natural law is written by the Creator's hand on the tablet of the human heart, as is written in the letter to the Romans. Therefore, human reason, not blinded by sin or passion, can easily read this natural law. It is in the light of the commands of this natural law that all positive law, whoever be the lawgiver, can be gauged in its moral content and hence in the authority it wields over conscience. Human laws, in flagrant contradiction with the natural law, are vitiated with a taint which no force, no power can mend. In the light of this principle, one must judge the axiom that right is common utility, a proposition which may be given a correct significance. It means that what is morally indefensible can never contribute to the good of the people. But ancient paganism acknowledged that axiom to be entirely true, but must be reversed and be made to say, as Cicero reformulated this in this, I quote Cicero, nothing can be useful if it is not at the same time morally good. Already the pagan Cicero established this. Nothing can be useful if it is not at the same time morally good. And then I quote now an important encyclical of Pope Pius XI, the so-called anti-Nazi encyclical, Mit brennender Sorge. It was written against Hitler and his Nazism ideology. Very important. In this encyclical, Mit brennender Sorge, says, emancipated from this oral rule, which Cicero said, nothing can be useful if it is not at the same time the moral good. Emancipated from this oral rule, the principle would in international law carry a perpetual state of war between nations, if it's not observed this principle, or for it ignores in national life by confusion of right and utility the basic fact that man is a person, as a person possesses rights he holds from God, and which any collectivity must protect against denial, suppression, or neglect. To overlook this truth is to forget that the real common good ultimately takes its measure from man's nature, which balances personal rights and social obligations, and from the purpose of society established for the benefit of human nature. Society was intended by the Creator for the full development of individual possibilities and for the social benefits, which by a give and take process, everyone can claim for his own sake and that of others. Higher and more general values, which collectivity alone can provide, also derive from the Creator for the good of man and for the full development, natural and supernatural, and the realization of his perfection. To neglect this order is to shake the pillars on which society rests, and to compromise social tranquility, security, and existence. So quotation from the anti-Nazi encyclical Mit brennender Sorge. We can ask, how is the good of the individual person related to the common good? Man, as an individual, as part of the whole, is subordinate to the state. But as a person, a spiritual being with an eternal end, man is superior to the state. The common good is only a good if it helps the members of society achieve their legitimate temporal goods and eternal end. The proper meaning of the common good consists in the implementation of normal and stable public conditions so that both individuals and families, with the correct use of their powers, can easily lead a worthy and happy life, a life according to God's law. This is the goal and the norm of the state and its organs. The power of the civil authority is not unlimited. It is not an oppressive omnipotence of any legitimate autonomy. Neither the individual nor the family should be absorbed by the state. In modern times, we assisted a kind of deification of civil authority, of the state, with its most adverse consequence, which is totalitarianism. It gives civil power an undue extension, determines and fixes its content and form all fields of activity, and in this way compresses all legitimate proper life, personal, local, and professional, into a mechanical unity and collectivity under the imprint or of nation or race or class and so on. This is totalitarianism. Now we can ask, what are the duties of citizens towards civil authorities, civil power? So they must first love their country, of course, and particularly their local community. Second, respect all civil authority. Then pray for those in public office, as the Holy Scripture says. Then obey all just laws. Then contribute to the taxes of the state, of course. Exercise political rights consciously. And what are the duties of the civil authorities? On the contrary, to those whom they govern. First, have to make and enforce laws protecting the rights of citizens at all stages of life, from conception to natural death. Then serve the greatness and material prosperity of the country, and then appoint honest and capable officials, and then safeguard public safety and protect and promote public morality. Prior to political authority, there is the paternal and maternal authority in the family. The family has at least equal rights with the state in the choice and pursuit of the things needful to its preservation and its just liberty. This is a basic truth which the Catholic Church always proclaimed. I repeat, it's so important. Prior, the family has at least equal rights with the state in the choice and pursuit of the things needful to its preservation and its just liberty of the family. Inasmuch as the domestic household is antecedent as well in idea as in fact to the gathering of men into a community, a political community, the family must necessarily have rights and duties which are prior to those of a political community and founded more immediately in nature. The political authority may not intrude into and exercise intimate control over the family and the household. Paternal authority can be neither abolished nor usurped by the state, for it has the same source as human life itself, paternal authority. What should we do when two laws appear to conflict? The higher law takes precedence in a conflict, the higher law. That means the natural law takes precedence over positive law, formulated law. Divine law takes precedence over human law. There exist cases where a human law should not be followed. If a law is made that exceeds the jurisdiction of the legislator, or gravely threatens the common good, or contradicts natural law, or contradicts divine law, it is then an act of violence rather than a true law. It is null and void, and need not to be followed, says St. Thomas Aquinas. Here arises the question, may we ever refuse obedience to civil or ecclesiastical authorities? Yes, as with all unjust laws, one may refuse obedience to any superior when, under the condition, when they demand something opposed to natural law or opposed to divine law, as grasped by a properly formed conscience. Now, what is then conscience? England became renowned through two teachers on conscience, that is to say, Thomas More and John Henry Newman. Thomas More stresses the communal nature of conscience. Thomas More was, after all, imprisoned precisely because he could not, in good conscience, swear allegiance to Henry VIII's oath. John Paul II spoke about this, I quote him, "The life and martyrdom of St. Thomas More have been the source of a message which spans the centuries and which speaks to people everywhere of the inalienable dignity of the human conscience, which the Second Vatican Council reminds us is the most intimate center and sanctuary of a person, in which he or she is alone with God. Whenever men or women heed the call of truth, their conscience then guides their actions reliably towards good. Precisely because of the witness which Thomas More bore, even at the price of his life, to the primacy of truth over power, Thomas More is venerated as an imperishable example of moral integrity. And even outside the church, particularly among those with responsibility for the destinies of peoples, Thomas More is acknowledged as a source of inspiration for a political system which has as its supreme goal the service of the human person. What enlightened his conscience more was the sense that man cannot be sundered from God, nor politics from morality. Man is created by God, and therefore human rights have their origin in God, are based upon the design of creation, and form part of the plan of redemption. One might even dare to say that the rights of man are also the rights of God, says John Paul II. And he continues to say, the life of St. Thomas More clearly illustrates a fundamental truth of political ethics. The defense of the church's freedom from unwarranted interference by the state is at the same time a defense in the name of the primacy of conscience, of the individual's freedom vis-à-vis political power. Here we find the basic principle of every civil order consonant with human nature. So John Paul II. In contrast to the modern claim that the individual can create his own moral values, Thomas More saw the formation of conscience as the fruit of an education in the truth. Far from being the arbitrator and creator of its own moral order, the human conscience is in need of conforming to the truth. For Thomas More, The formation of conscience is the result of a long process in which one discovers a pre-existing created moral order. Nothing underscores the profound differences between Thomas More's and the modernists' understanding of conscience more than this fact. That is to say, whereas modern thought views the individual's conscience as being above all other authorities, Thomas More's conscience testifies to the superiority of the church's authority to the king's authority, in the case of Henry VIII. Thomas More's refusal to take Henry VIII's oath was not an act of civil disobedience, but rather it was an act of obedience to truth, and thus, in his view, an act of genuine liberty. Thomas More, the great English scholar and statesman, is admired by believers and not believers alike for the integrity with which he followed his conscience, even at the cost of displeasing the sovereign Henry VIII, whose good servant he was, because he chose to serve God first. In one of his last letters from the Tower of London, Thomas More wrote to his daughter Margaret the following, I quote, "I know myself well, worthy that God should let me slip. Yet can I not but trust in his merciful goodness, that as his grace has strengthened me hitherto, and made me content in my heart to lose goods, to lose lands, to lose my life too, rather than to swear against my own conscience." So this was one of his last letters to his daughter. John Henry Newman is called sometimes the doctor of conscience, means the teacher of conscience. He is known in his lapidary expression about conscience as the, quotation, aboriginal vicar of Christ. We quote now from his letter to the famous letter to the Duke of Norfolk, where he writes, quotation, "Conscience is the aboriginal vicar of Christ, a prophet in its informations, a monarch in its peremptoriness, a priest in its blessings and anathemas. And even though the eternal priesthood through the church could cease to be, in it the sacerdotal principle would remain and would have as well. Conscience, the existence of which we cannot deny, is a proof of the doctrine of a moral governor, which alone gives it a meaning and a scope. That is, the doctrine of a judge and the judgment to come is a development of the phenomenon of conscience. So, John Henry Newman. In his novel Callista, there is a beautiful dialogue between the characters of the book, which proves this concept of conscience. The passage indicates that Newman identifies conscience as the echo of God's voice, rather than God's voice itself. It's a difference. The echo of God's voice and the God's voice itself. I quote from this, his novel. It's a dialogue. "I feel that God is within my heart. I feel myself in his presence. He says to me, do this, don't do that. You may tell me that this dictate is a mere law of my nature, as is to joy or to grief. I cannot understand this. No, it is the echo of a person speaking to me. Nothing shall persuade me that it does not ultimately proceed from a person external to me. It carries with it its proof of its divine origin. My nature feels towards it as towards a person. When I obey it, I feel a satisfaction. When I disobey, a soreness, just like that which I feel in pleasing or offending some revered friend. So, you see, Polemo, I believe in what is more than a mere something. I believe in what is more real to me than sun, moon, stars, and the fair earth, and the voice of friends. You will say, what? Who is he? Has he ever told you anything about himself? Alas, no. The more's the pity. But I will not give up what I have, because I have not more. An echo implies a voice. A voice implies a speaker. That speaker I love and I fear. So John Henry Newman from his novel Callista. Our time is characterized by the phenomenon that man can manipulate his own conscience. In addition, the temptation to manipulate one's own conscience becomes greater when man's conduct is distorted. It is then that he tries to draw out his own conscience or uses it in the wrong way by defending himself against the truth. John Henry Newman noticed this situation during his time. Quotation, I observed that a civilized age is more exposed to subtle sins than a rude age. Why? For this simple reason, because it is more fertile in excuses and evasions. It can defend error, and hence can blind the eyes of those who have not very careful consciences. It can make error plausible. It can make vice look like virtue. It dignifies sin by fine names. It calls avarice proper care of one's family, or industry it calls pride independence. It calls ambition greatness of mind. Resentment it calls proper spirit and sense of honor, and so on. Conscience is a stern monitor, but in this century it has been superseded by a counterfeit which the 18th centuries prior to it never heard of, and could not have mistaken for it if they had. It is the right of self-will. This false understanding of conscience was defined by John Henry Newman as self-will. In this age, he says, with a large portion of the public, it is the very freedom of conscience to dispense this conscience, to ignore a lawgiver and judge, to be independent of unseen obligations. Conscience is a stern monitor, but in this century it has been superseded by counterfeit. When men advocate the rights of conscience, they in no sense mean the rights of the Creator, not the duty to Him, in thought and deed, but the right of thinking, speaking, writing, and acting according to their own judgment of their humor, without any thought of God at all. They do not even pretend to go by any moral rule, but demand for each to be his own master in all things, to profess what he pleases. So John Henry Newman, after false understanding of conscience, already in the 19th century. So, when it is lawful to resist unjust laws, St. Thomas Aquinas said, laws are unjust through being opposed to divine law. So, the only reason, says Leo XIII, a great pope of the social doctrine, he says, the only reason which men have for not obeying is when anything is demanded of them which is openly repugnant to the natural or divine law, for it is equally unlawful to command to do anything in which the law of nature or the will of God is violated. If, therefore, it should happen to anyone to be compelled to prefer one or the other, for example, to disregard either the commands of God or those of the government, he must obey Jesus Christ, who commanded us to give to Caesar what is that is to Caesar, and to God what is God's, and must reply courageously, we ought to obey God rather than man. And yet there is no reason why those who so behave themselves should be accused of refusing obedience. For if the will of political authority is opposed to the will and the laws of God, they themselves exceed the bounds of their own power and authority, and pervert justice. Nor can their authority then be valid, which, when there is no justice, is null. So, Pope Leo XIII. At the conclusion, I can say that the politicization of reason in our day is the absolutization of political authority, which is another definition of totalitarianism. When every aspect of reality is interpreted in terms of political narrative, which becomes the interpretative key for all aspects of social life, law, education, medicine even, family, society at all levels splits along political lines because culture is entirely subordinated to politics, and the idea of politics is subsumed with the idea of this absolutization. Pope Benedict XVI left as a luminous reflection about the nature and aim of authentic political authority, related also to the duties of conscience. I quote him from his famous address to the Bundestag in Berlin, where he spoke the following words. For the fundamental issues of law, in which the dignity of human and of humanity is at stake, the majority principle is not enough. Everyone in a position of responsibility must personally seek out the criteria to be followed when framing laws. In the 3rd century, the great theologian Origen provided the following explanation for the resistance of Christians to certain legal systems. Suppose that a man were living among the Scythians, barbarians whose laws are contrary to the divine law, and was compelled to live among them. Such a man, for the sake of the true law, though illegal among the Scythians, barbarians, would rightly form associations with like-minded people contrary to the laws of these barbarians. This conviction was what motivated resistance movements to act against the Nazi regime of Hitler and other totalitarian regimes, thereby doing a great service to justice and to humanity as a whole. For these people, it was indisputable evident that the law in force was actually unlawful. Yet when it comes to the decisions of a democratic politician, the question of what now corresponds to the law of truth what is actually right and maybe enacted as law is less obvious. In terms of the underlying anthropological issues, what is right and may be given the force of law is in no way simply self-evident today. The question of how to recognize what is truly right and thus to serve justice when framing laws has never been simple, and today, in view of the vast extent of our knowledge and our capacity, it has become still harder. So Benedict XVI to the Deutsche Bundestag. We conclude. In his dystopian 1932 novel Brave New World, Aldous Huxley described a society in which human beings were manufactured, lived permanently on drugs and never not allowed to think for themselves. Towards the end of the book, World Controller Mustafa Mont explains to the hero of the novel that he has locked away certain books as dangerous because they make people think. He shows him spiritual and literary classics such as the Bible, Shakespeare, and Thomas Kempis' The Imitation of Christ. These 3 books. But among them, too, are some writings of Cardinal Newman also. The controller then starts quoting from Newman's parochial and plain sermons. Quotation. We are not our own any more than what we possess in our own. We did not make ourselves. We cannot be supreme over ourselves. We are not our own masters. We are God's property. Is it not our happiness thus to view the matter? Is it any happiness or any comfort to consider that we are our own? Quotation from Newman. For the world controller, such an appeal to a higher authority than his was dangerous. Indeed, Newman's view that a Christian should be moved by an informed conscience to act according to a higher standard than that of the established order can be seen as profoundly subversive. Is a Christian a suitable person to hold public office? If Christians follow their well-formed and informed conscience, then they must certainly are the most suitable people to play a role in public life, and governments should snap them up for all sorts of roles. For such a Christian has a clear sense of right and wrong, of the good and the evil, and the true. A man or woman concerned primarily about the judgment of conscience will be a far better public servant than one only moved by the judgment of the crowds. Indeed, on the right understanding and exercise of political authority related to the duties of conscience depend the true well-being and happiness of the human person in human society. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very, very much, Bishop Schneider, for this very clear and comprehensive talk that gave us, I'm absolutely sure, a lot of food for thought. I'm particularly happy to have somebody in our department here where we don't speak much about conscience, but about political narratives and will for power and these things, to have been introduced into a very clear exposition of conscience as a political category. And it was not only a talk about theory, it was and you opened up many, many paths into our contemporary 2023 with very well chosen examples, and I'm absolutely sure that there will be plenty of things to discuss. And I would like to open the floor now to the audience. This question, and if you just said your name, that would be great. So here.
My name is Dan. I have a question about conscience. So suppose you have an organisation with a superior and a subordinate and a subordinate is doing good works or doing something good, and the superior tells them to stop or to do something which is not as good. Is it ever okay for the subordinate to disobey in that case? Or when is it better to...
Yes. But usually when the command, the order of the superior is not contrary, especially to the natural law or to the divine law, we have to obey. If we are in a dependence, we have to obey in this case.
I guess evil is the lack of good, and if the superiors, by stopping you or somebody from doing good.
Well, it depends on the situation. For example, when you are rescuing a person who is, let us say, in danger, and the superior says, no, you have not to help him, then it is immoral. You have an obligation to do this good work and to help this person, and it is really necessary. Or when you have for example, when you have your conscience say you have to protest against an evil, let us say abortion or so on, and your superior says, no, you have to silence. I have not to do this. Then you have to know, I have to speak this because it's my conscience. I have to speak the truth in this case. So it depends on the situation concretely. What you are doing, your good work, your good. But it depends. But usually when you are subordinate, you have to, when the command is reasonable, you have to obey. Even if it could be a lesser good, to stop with this what you are doing.
Yes, we can, if we have two, we can also bring questions together. That was in the back, yes?
Hello, my name is Josephine, and I was wondering, obviously in the past few years there's been some talk on reducing police forces, particularly connected with the Black Lives Matter movement, which exploded a bit in the summer of 2020. And in some communities where policing has been severely curtailed, you might have incidences of vigilante justice where the people attempt to fill the hole which the police has left in pursuing justice, and that can often lead to violence sometimes. I was wondering what you thought about the morality in general of vigilante justice and people taking over from the police when the police is stepping back or not there.
So you mean to attacking the police?
Not attacking the police, but say there's a criminal who is committing a crime in front of you and it's obvious the police is not going to do anything. What's the morality of stepping in and potentially using even deadly force?
Yes, I think it could be a kind of self-defense when there is a criminal damaging maybe the life of others, and the police is doing nothing. I think that here is the moral possibility of self-defense of a special group of people to defend themselves or to defend the others who this criminal is damaging.
Hi, I'm Augusta. So in Plato's dialogue Crito, Socrates is talking to his friends after he's been condemned to death unjustly, and they're discussing whether he has to obey the law and go and die, or whether he has to, whether he stays, or whether he flees away, rather, into exile. So I guess I'm wondering, in the case where the law, where you're not forced to do something unjust, but rather injustice is forced onto you, what is the response there? What is the Christian response there?
Yes, when you have injustice towards you, yes, it depends on when this is a grave injustice, for example, for your family, you have that right not to obey this. because it depends on the other people you are connected with them. When they commit a grave injustice against you, you have to evaluate in which extent it will be impact on your life, this injustice. When it is really something against the laws established, you have the right to defend yourself. This moral means, of course.
I suppose the alternative then is martyrdom, like in case of Thomas More.
No, in Thomas More, it's another case, as this, because here, in the case of Thomas More, it was touching the divine law directly. So the oath, it was against divine law, and he cannot here obey, and he chose martyrdom. As for example, the first 3 centuries, the Christians, they were compelled to sacrifice to the idols, statues, but only they were not asked to formally renounce Christ. No, they were only asked to put a grain of incense before the statue, a grain of incense, and no more. And almost all the Christians, they preferred to a martyrdom, because this was a clear sign, public sign of idolatry. And idolatry is against the first commandment of God. And we have to prefer to lose all things here on earth rather than to damage our soul, to lose our soul for all eternity.
Okay, I still have now I have more questions, so we perhaps start putting 2 questions together, if that's possible. There was one here in the back, and then there's one here. No, yeah, please.
My name is Paul. I would like to ask you if you could expound more on religious liberty and as a human right in society today. Does it entail that you can worship any religion, false religions and false gods? Because they can all claim.
I would like to ask you, would you like to respond directly, or can we take another question and you do them in a bundle? But whatever you prefer.
Well, this is
okay.
This is
we have. I mean, we are not bound by any time. Sort of like
question, of course, is spoken a lot of these in the past, and now from the traditional point of view, from when you see the Holy Scripture and the Fathers of the Church, all the continuous. It is never but was taught that there is a human right based in the human nature, and what is meaning based in human nature, as it is a participation in the eternal law of God, in the eternal wisdom of God and will of God. So these we have to clarify what is the natural law, or based on, and when we say that simply it is a human right or based on natural law, what this means, based on the will of God, positively, to be able to have a right to spread any religion, what you want, even idolatry, let us say, even Satanism is also a religion. We cannot imagine that it's the will of God and He has to spread Satanism, the worship of Satan, as a human right. It is absurd and contradictory. We have to think at the ultimate consequences of this concept of religious liberty. One, of course, the only one religion which has even a natural right, hence willed by God eternally in His wisdom, to spread this religion unimpededly, is the Catholic faith, the only true one, because it's revealed by God directly, by Christ, by logics. They cannot be in the same level, truth and half-truths, or even worth. This is the Christian vision from the Church Fathers, always. And another thing is here, we have to distinguish the tolerance. We can be tolerant towards other religions, even tolerant towards idolaters, who are, it depends on the society where we are living. When we are living in a complete secular society, Of course, we are tolerant. My neighbor is an idolater. I will not offend him. I will respect him. I will not call the police and arrest him. No, as long as he is not doing, external, some disorder and so on. But we can tolerate and the tolerance is really depends on the situation, depends on the political society and so on. For example, when there is, let us say, 100% Catholic society, let us say, and almost all citizens are truly believing Christians, and they want to transmit the same faith to their children. And they do not want that their children, when they're growing, will be infiltrated and contaminated, let us say, by idolatry. And then it is a question of democracy. Then they say, we are citizens, we want to defend our people, our children, our youth from propagation, public propagation, display of, let us say, Satanism or idolatry. In this case, they can limit the religious liberty for the sake of the common good, but reasonably limiting. This depends. Okay, then is.
My name is Leonhard. Thank you for the very clear and interesting talk, Excellency. I was wondering how a government creating positive laws which are contrary to divine law impacts that government's legitimacy. Because, of course, all or most governments which are in place create some laws which are contrary to divine law and which are thus not to be obeyed, but rather we should obey natural law. But how does this impact the legitimacy of the government as such, as the government which we are in principle subordinate on? And at what point is there some threshold where a government becomes illegitimate because of the amount of illicit laws it has?
Yes, I think that even though the government remains legitimate, we have the example from Jesus Christ and the apostles. In those times, the Roman government imposed even idolatry laws. And St. Paul writes, we have to obey the government to the extent that we cannot accept these laws, but we accept their authority still, because there cannot be a society without authority. They will be anarchical. And this is the greater evil than the anarchy, than to tolerate an unjust government. We can resist, we can make morally approved resistance without violence, but this is our right, as in a democracy or in a community, but they remain legitimate.
Right, there were sort of like, I think you were next, and then I have two more, please.
Thank you so much. I was just wondering how you translate the principles you've exposed to the relationship between conscience and the ecclesiastical authority. In particular, I'm thinking of the case of Bishop Strickland recently, and what happens if the Aboriginal Vicar of Christ is in conflict with the will of the non-Aboriginal but acting Vicar of Christ.
Yes, now we go to the ecclesiastical aspect. Yes, in this case, I think Bishop Strickland, he was basically only preaching the gospel and the deposit of faith in an openly courageous manner, what a bishop should do, what did the apostles, St. Athanasius and all the great saints in difficult times, and nothing more. Even so, maybe there was some expression could be made more in another way, but basically he did only his duty, because, in a situation where the majority of the episcopate is silent, some voices who are speaking the normality are perceived as extraordinary or as extreme. this is our situation. The same was in the 4th century with St. Athanasius and Basil and other saints. And now, for example, Bishop Strickland, he was forced by the Pope to resign. And in conscience, he refused this, in this case. In conscience, I cannot resign because I cannot see why I should resign and leave my people. And then he said, I will accept the decision of the Pope if he will remove me or depose. And so the Pope did. And he accepted this with humility and with a very spiritual attitude. So there's a difference. Some orders can be when a church bishop is forcing a priest, let us say, to give communion for public sinners known. And then the priest can say, oh, Your Excellency, I cannot obey here. I have to obey a higher authority, the constant teaching of the magisterium. In this case, also he can invoke the conscience, and yes.
Right, there were two more right now, and then the third one here. I don't know who was first of you two guys. Please. Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Saite. My question is, I'm interested in knowing what's the role of conscience in modern politics, especially during the times of war, conflicts, and occupation. If the great teachers of conscience alive, what would they say to the Israeli government in terms of the reaction to the Hamas attack? Or what would they say to all the other governments witnessing the number of casualties increasing dramatically over the past few weeks?
Well, I think that this is not the task of bishops or the church father. They did never, address conflicts of wars and so on. Usually not. This is a very political question. We have only to establish principles. Of course, if there is an exceptional injustice, but it's always difficult for the church to take positions. We have to be pastors for all souls. We have to save the souls. And so, therefore we have to be, I repeat, shepherds for all. There can be on both sides people who they have to shepherd. And this is, as Jesus Christ, when they came to him, he said, please judge my inheritance against my brother who has defrauded. And Christ said, no, I will not do this because it's not my task to judge the temporal affairs. It was the response of Christ. And so the church, I think, and the bishops and the priests has to more carefully to appeal for the peace always, of course, the just peace, to pray that violence must stop, and this is our task. We have not to go inside the politics. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Positive law comes beneath the natural law, and the natural law beneath the divine. You also, what you said about individualism reminded me of the polemic, liberalism is a sin, by Father Felix Sadi Sabani. And I was wondering, to what extent would you agree that liberalism and individualism represent an inversion of that hierarchy, such that the individual comes above the temporal law, the positive law above the natural above the divine?
Yes, this is a tendency in the new world. I mean, since the liberalism for the French Revolution, which started, and this is the modern world, is basically marked by the thinking of the French Revolution. And this is the basic idea, is the independence of any given law above human being. So they rejected, of course, the divine law explicitly. And when you reject the divine law, the creator, and then even so, when you the first time still say we will observe the natural law by our reason, the French Revolution did not deny first the natural law, but by time you come to the conclusion and to start to deny part of the natural law and so on. And so this is now our situation in our day, the last decades, that we arrived at political authority denies and even the evident basic natural law. This is the consequence. Mm-hmm.
So
Would
we're
you
going
like-
backwards. We're going backwards.
Of course. Mm-hmm.
There are two, right, one here and one there, yes. And I think if we target something like 6 o'clock, so for anybody who has questions, start preparing, please.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. That was a wonderful talk and such wonderful clarity, which we get very rarely these days. I was just wondering, so you quoted St. John Henry Newman so beautifully on how it's so much more difficult to form our consciences these days. And I think, form conscience by orthodoxy and orthopraxy. And orthodoxy, we can all go and read the catechism and, learn of these things. But I was wondering if you have any advice on educating ourselves by orthopraxy, because our parents may not share our faith or may have different, disordered lives, not live the way we are taught by the magisterium, and we are surrounded by colleagues that are secular. So how can we educate ourselves on that level, but just more about the small sins rather than the great ones?
Yes, of course, there is always the danger to know something, the theory, and then the praxis to implement this. But I think this is interdependence both. So when you practice the truth, you live this. This is strengthening your conscience and your convictions ever more. The more you are listening and not believing what you according to the truth, by time your conscience is becoming in some way you can stifle your conscience, and it is becoming not sensible. This is the danger. People who are consciously living for a long time, consciously choosing the moral evil, they, by time, stifle their conscience, the voice, and they become even inventing other theories to justify their own life.
Yes, there were, first of all, you with the tie. Now it's your time, yes.
Thank you, Richard Rex. I was concerned by the tidiness. It's a tidy theory, and one can produce a very elegant account of conscience on one model. But what is the use of that when the understanding of conscience in society at large is indeed so very different? And is it even helpful for us to be talking the same language? What are we trying to achieve with this talk of conscience? How are we going to make, how can you suggest that it gains purchase in a culture where these arguments naturally are not going to be heard?
Yes, it is important because we have in our modern political society in Europe, let us say in the Western world, moments where believers, must follow their conscience regarding some laws. Let us say when you are saying that marriage can only be between a male and a female, today you can be accused. And it's happened. The famous example you have from the Finnish former Prime Minister, a lady, I forgot her name, she was judged by several trials, but ultimately she was absolved, thanks be to God, by the higher court. But she had to go through this humiliation, and she said she was argumenting with her conscience. This is a concrete example. That my conscience says that I have to speak this way because I'm a Christian. The Bible says me this, and my reason. As an example. Then we had the historical example from Thomas More. It's a political situation also, and a religious in that time of Henry VIII. But it could happen in a similar way in our time also. But this example of this politician in Finland, we had a very concrete example.
Good.
Monsignor, maybe...
Oh, yes, these two were just in... Please.
My name is
You have the final word.
Thank you very much for the talk. So with what you mentioned of a lot of people suppressing their conscience over time and engaging in morally evil acts, how do you suggest, with the importance of a well-informed conscience, how can we determine for ourselves whether our conscience is well-formed or not as individuals, and so take cues from that?
Yes. First, of course, the conscience is the voice, the echo of God, of the eternal law in your... And usually, the human being perceives when something is wrong or not, in the depths of the conscience. But, as I said already, when a person is doing some immorality for a longer time, and then is really suppressing the voice, a time of the conscience, and starting to find arguments to justify his lifestyle or his actions. This is always is proven by life. And therefore we have to, I repeat, to try to live the truth and the good, the morality, which we know from the commandments of God, the 10 Commandments, and in specific issues we have to form our conscience with good literature, which we have access, or to ask advice by good people.
Henry, Your Excellency, you've spoken about very clearly about resisting positive law that's in contradiction to natural or divine law, but I wonder, in circumstances where we in a democratic society have an opportunity to change the law by way of an election, to what extent and in what way does our conscience compel us to act when, let's say, all the candidates in different ways and to different extents want to extend laws that are also to be resisted? So, which, do you vote for the lesser of the two evils, or do you abstain, or are you compelled to become an activist for a third way, even if there is no chance of that having any impact?
It's a very difficult question to the lesser evil. In this case, yes, I think we have to balance what is the chance, which chance we have. I think in this case we can choose the lesser evil, at least that the evil will be not so much spread in the society, and by time to build up a new political class. It is our duty also to build up a new political class who will respect reason, really reason. We have to appeal to reason. You have Chesterton, the famous English writer of reason, of human, how to say, the common sense. Common sense and respect for natural law. This, I think, even if these are from different beliefs, we can make an alliance with these people.
Your Excellency, in terms of our modern society, relativism seems to have taken the main stage, and the context of a truth, which only is one truth, contained in the humanity and the divinity of Jesus Christ, revealed by God to humanity and by humanity to God in response. How do we cope with being able to be true to our conscience without the context also of willing to give ourselves in martyrdom for truth and speaking the truth in love.
Of course, we have always to spread truth in love with conviction and to try to help the other people as a kind of help for the neighbor, to help him to come closer to the truth with good arguments. Therefore, we have to make a work of, in some way, apologetics. In good way, we do need apologetics for the truth. It is a great service of charity for your neighbor when you bring him a vision or something that he is seeing the truth, the good. This is a work we have to do.
If I may, we hit the 6 o'clock, but I can't really help asking one last question, if I may. And that is, you talked about totalitarianism, you talked about Huxley. We don't live in a time, at least in Western societies, where the Gestapo, the checker knock at the door at 5 o'clock in the morning. But we live in a world in which the digitalized economy has brought a level of control onto us, which is for our better good, of course, right? So it's about the discrimination here, how can I actually... So I think in our time it's much more difficult to see the difference between a malevolent intention of political authority and the duty to resist. How would you be your take on that?
You are right. It is more sophisticated. They say, for your good we will control you. But I think that we have to form intelligent politicians, people, to unmask these so-called "we are taking care of you." Then we are slaves. When the state is taking complete control over us, saying it's only for your good, then we have to say no. This is a society of slaves. A slaveholder also says, I know what is better for my slave. And we have to, I think, to be honest and to say to this political authority their limits also, in this case also.
This is a tragically optimistic view.
No, we have to do something. We cannot sit down and do nothing. I think we have to, public people, to form a new political movement, or people in public, maybe in the universities also, to start teaching the new political generation in the universities, and then in the politics.
I think Bishop Schneider deserves a big round of applause. Very much for your fascinating talk and for being with us for another 40 minutes to answer.
We had good participants, 2 babies. It is the sign of hope.
Well, you start educating them early.
The mothers are educating them.
Right, there are some drinks outside and everybody's welcome to attend and of course open to discussion, and I'm pretty sure His Excellency will be ready to answer more questions. Okay, thank you very much.